You are listening to Backstage Pass podcast, hosted by Hannah Trigwell and brought to you by Tom. Hello, Dr. Hayley Bosher.
Hello.
I don't believe we've ever had a doctor as a podcast guest before.
Well, I think we should specify that I'm not a medical doctor. I can't save any of you, but I have a PhD, which gives me the grand title of a doctor and was fully my motivation for doing a PhD in the first place. I was like, what's a PhD? And my supervisor was like, you get to be a doctor. And I was like, sign me up. Sounds great. So I love it. I use it all the time.
Brilliant. So you are author of Copyright in the Music Industry book, and you also have an awesome podcast called Whose Song Is It Anyway? I'm going to ask you some quick fire questions. Read a book or watch a movie?
Read a book. Especially mine.
Are your go-to songs happy or sad?
Happy. It's a good question, though. That I had to think about that one.
Are you more excited about artificial intelligence or augmented reality?
I think AI. I think artificial intelligence is going to have more of a probably an actual impact on my personal life, because maybe if like gaming and stuff, my experience of augmented reality stuff comes from, I used to work in the Netherlands and I taught people who were creating film and game. And so that's my experience of augmented reality. And honestly, it made me feel seasick. Like I remember there was one where you actually do swim, and like I felt like I was going to fall on my face all the time. So for me personally, it wasn't a great experience. So I think I'm not going to be so much into that, as maybe the AI stuff might actually come into my life more.
Can you give us kind of like an overview of your career? Because there's so many things that you do.
I have worked with probably more non-law students than law students, even though I'm a legal academic. And I think that's what gives me the ability to be able to like communicate and connect with like non-law audiences, which is harder to come across, I think, whereas like lots of my colleagues are great at teaching the law students and not so great at connecting with the people who might be at the effect of the law that they're working on.
Right,
And also for me, I did performing arts before I did law. Like really, that's where my heart is. I just love music, film, theatre. My dream job genuinely would be to be in musical theatre. Like that would be my dream job. I would just love it. But I was like super average at these things. And so I went to uni and did a law degree instead. So I was like, I could probably do better in this arena. And then I found intellectual property and I was like, a marriage of my two favourite things.
The whole copyright thing, I think, can be a bit daunting, especially to new or like upcoming songwriters. For me, I feel like I kind of know things that I need to know at this point, but I have had one question in my mind for a while, which is, what happens when somebody like a DJ or a producer remixes a track that's already been released?
If you wanted to like technically do it correctly, you would need a license for that, or permission at least, from the rights holder. And there's a couple of rights at play. It is a little bit like layered. So, the song has two rights. You have a right in the actual composition of the song, and you have a right in the sound recording. And if you're making a remix of a song, you're usually using both of those rights, because, like if you make a cover of a song, you're only using the compositional copyright.
Yeah.
Unless you use a backing track, maybe. But if you're doing a remix, you're using two. So you might need two licenses. Could be from two different people depending on the song. And the thing about the clearance of those kind of things, sometimes it can be like a pretty straightforward situation where you just go through like MCPS. Other times it depends if your remix becomes like a whole new song and then you need to actually negotiate a license with the rights holders. It depends on like who you are and what you're doing and what the purpose of the song is, if you're releasing it or if you're just putting it on YouTube. We interviewed a representative from PRS, who is the license body, for one of our podcast guest. And she was like, it's really straightforward, just get a license. And I was like, I hear what you're saying. I do. At the very core of it, it's like, if you want to use someone else's creative work, you should get permission, you should get a license. And I'm a pro copyright person in that sense. But also you have to be realistic, and you have to look at the context and specific circumstances of what the situation is to see what's doable. And you go from there.
If anyone ever used a sample, the first question is, well, how? Like, who do I even contact?
Yeah, exactly. And there are people now whose jobs, like full on job. There was a guy who helped me with when I wrote the book, I wanted to check to make sure that some of the things I'd said about how much it costs to get a certain sample license and stuff like that, like it was actually right. And his job is, he's a sample accountant. Like that's that's his whole job. So
wow,
it's become such a massive like industry in itself, like clearing sample rights, that is some people's whole job, is to just do that. So there are people you can hire to help you, but you have to be at that level in that position where you're hiring people to help you. If you're doing it yourself, which is obviously like how everybody starts, is maybe just like one or two of you, then yeah, exactly. It's like, what do I do? Call up Warner, like, can I use this? Can I use this sample? They're like, this is not the right department for this. So yeah, sometimes it can be like, you don't know where to begin, and then you don't know how much it's going to cost. And then there's usually a negotiation. Exactly. That's the thing, is for me, my motto is always like, knowledge is power, because when it gets to the negotiation part, if you don't know what your rights are, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and how much this usually costs, they could be like, cool, we want 75% of your royalties for this 5-second sample. And you'd be like, maybe that's what happens? You don't know. So the negotiation, and everything in copyright is a negotiation. All the licenses, all the contracts, that's all it is. It's just a legal agreement. A contract is just like an agreement between two people recognized by law. So we can say whatever you want it to say, and you have to negotiate that. And you can't really negotiate a contract if you don't know what's going on, and like what is acceptable and what your rights are, and what would be okay, like when it would be okay for you to use a sample without paying a license at all, for example.
There's a lot of people who are freelancing who would write a song, sell that as a work for hire, never get any royalties for it, but then would never have been paid for that song if they hadn't have sold it as a work for hire. So it's a bit of a strange situation, is it? How do you feel about that stuff?
Well, it kind of actually, the reason probably why it reminded you of it is the same thing how I feel about it, is that like, sometimes you can't say work for hire is good or bad, because it entirely depends on the person and the situation and the song, everything. Yeah. But what I do have a strong view about is that people shouldn't be signing these contracts if they don't really understand what they're missing out on. Like not understanding that you could be making royalties from this if you didn't assign those rights, but just assuming like, oh, this is just how that works. Here you go. Here's the song I made. Which sometimes it's like that lack of understanding could lead someone into a disadvantaged situation, but also not even, lack of understanding, like not understanding what an assignment is, but not getting how valuable copyright can be to you, like how keeping those rights can sustain you for longer. And you might sell those rights, like you're seeing in the news recently, people selling their catalogs, and that's their pension that will pay for the rest of their life. But they could only do that because they had those rights to sell.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? True. But, I've done it as well. Like the book, for example, I get a very small royalty payment every time. I mean, you think the music industry is bad. The publishing industry is a joke with like the amount I get. Luckily, I have a salary because I work at university. I wouldn't be able to live off that. But for the audio book, I recorded it as an audio book because I wanted it to be like more accessible. They paid me a one-off fee, and I won't get any royalties for that. That's fine by me. What frustrates me is people who sign this and then the song becomes really successful, makes somebody else millions, and they're like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. I should have kept it.
Yeah. Stinger.
Yeah, real stinger. And
that would hurt.
Yeah, literally. And that's when we see like some case law where people, that happens and then they go and fight about it. But ultimately they're usually bound by the contract that they signed. If you can't show duress or like, you know, somebody pressured you into signing it, then it's like, well, you did agree. I have had clients where this has happened and they've come to me. And do you know what? Sometimes, and I'm sure other like copyright lawyers would probably say the same thing. Sometimes you feel a bit like, not a therapist, but sometimes you have to just help the person emotionally rather than lawyering. It's really strange, but because it's all to do with their creative art. So I'm thinking of this one guy who created something and it was amazing and he sold it to Disney and they took it and they did something else with it and he didn't like what they did with it. And so he's like, but that was my baby. I made it like this because this is how it was in my head, rah, rah, rah. And I was like, yeah, it's not yours anymore. Like you sold it. And, you know, then it became, so that's what I mean about it. It becomes so emotional because when you sell something, which is when you assign the right to somebody else, you give up the right to say how they use it. Sometimes you even give up the right that they might not use it at all and the whole thing gets lost, which is even also really devastating. Yeah, because like when I work with film people, this happens a lot where there's like a no obligation clause in the contract, which means we are not obliged to use the thing you give us. But you should always ask for a way, if I don't use it, can I have it back? But that's something you need to negotiate in the contract negotiations. You wouldn't automatically have that in there. It ultimately came down to a fear in him that he would never create anything as good as that thing he created. And so that's why he was so obsessed with this thing that he had sold and they'd changed it. And I was like, but you'll have other good ideas. Like people don't just come up with one idea and it's the end of their creativity, you know?
Speaking of good ideas, what is your track of the week?
I've just found out that Reading Festival is going ahead this year. And I'm feeling really nostalgic about Reading Festival. And so I was listening to Fall Out Boy because I've seen them a couple of times at Reading Festival. And I was just like, they remind me of this period of time when I was at college. It's so weird, isn't it? How some songs, like the second it comes on, it just takes you to this place. Not even like where I was. I can remember how I felt in that song. It gives me like a moment in time. And I'm just like, wow. So maybe not a song. That's not a song. That's an artist. But
Sugar We're Going Down or something.
Yeah, like old school Fall Out Boy from college years. I've just been having that on really loud and like dancing around the house, pretending it's live music.
What is the best lesson you've learned in your career so far?
That's really hard to even think about that because my career is such, and probably it's exactly the same for you, where like there actually is no line between career and life.
Yeah.
Everything that's happening in my career right now is a perfect merge of like, you know, I work hard and I'm very prepared, but also I'm super available for like the universe to just like take over and go with the flow. Like even the book, my music book, it happened so serendipitously. Like I was at my friend's book launch and I had an idea that I would write a book about music and copyright. I was talking to someone, it turned out to be her book editor, who is now my book editor. And it's like, if I hadn't gone to that event and talked to that guy, this book wouldn't exist. Be prepared and work hard, but actually be available for something that you don't actually imagine would happen. Because, you know, I didn't think that I would be in this point in my life, well, ever. Like I said, I didn't even know what a PhD was. This was not on my life plan to become an academic and write a music book and all that stuff. Like, a lot of it feels like it just kind of happened.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, in a good way, you know, like I just feel like I show up, and as long as you show up, like the universe will show up and meet you, and then like good things happen. Because if I imagine what I thought, well, like I said, if I imagined my life, I'd be on the stage doing musical theatre. But here I am, and I do genuinely really enjoy my job. So
that's
I'm
awesome.
really happy.
You've been such a great guest on this podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Not at all. It's been really good fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. Be sure to hit subscribe and leave a comment to let us know what you think. And I will see you next time on Backstage Pass.